Hello and welcome to the podcast here at Baker Heights Church of Christ. This is our first podcast, and tonight we're going to be having a little discussion on 1 John 2:16. Here with me I have Jesse Mullins, and I'm Sean Dentremont, so we're just going to get right into it, and I'll leave it to Jesse to go over the passage, and we'll get going.
Well, yes, thank you, Sean, and I've got to say, I really feel like this is an auspicious occasion. You know, we've worked on this to get this podcast going, and this is a first for our team anyway. And I'm really excited about this. So I hope it goes a long way.
Let's do it.
Yes, we're talking today about, in one sense, about a beautiful symmetry that we find in the Bible. But we start with a passage in the book of 1 John in chapter 2, where the apostle defines for us basically not just what sin is, but kind of the totality of sin. So I'll read that.
Okay.
This is 15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. This passage, again, as we said, it points out three types of sin. The lust of the flesh. We know certainly our flesh is a source of temptation to us.
Right.
The lust of the eyes, which how would you describe the lust of the eyes?
I would think that the lust of the eyes is primarily the idea that you crave or desire something that you can see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on top of that, these three ideas are wouldn't you say they're kind of like the source of all sins in a sense?
Yes. And also, I think when I think of lust of the eyes, I think of wealth or desires. Basic
covetousness.
Covetousness.
Exactly. Yeah.
And go on.
Yeah, definitely. I think covetousness is a great word. It just really embodies the idea that anything you can see, you want to take hold of and you want to have, in that kind of idolatrous covetousness.
Yeah, and we certainly are all tempted that way. And then finally, there's the pride, the sin of pride, or what's called the pride of life. I know C.S. Lewis has a chapter on this in his book Mere Christianity, and he calls pride the chief of sins.
Sure.
And he even goes so far to say it is the complete anti-God state of mind. But basically, I think it comes down to this. We can either choose the world or we can choose God. We can choose ourselves or we can choose God. Pride is basically choosing ourselves over God. And pride is, and one more thought here on pride, I think a lot of people have trouble with it because what constitutes being prideful? I want to feel good about myself, but I think a good rule to use on yourself as to whether you're being prideful or not is pride is competitive. It tends to view, you tend to want to view yourself in competition with others. Am I better? How much better am I? Can I be perceived as more important than someone else? When that's going on, you have a case of pride.
In a nutshell, you'd almost say it's selfish instead of selfless.
Yes.
And really, when you look at the original source of pride, it would be Satan. Mm-hmm. And Satan turned away from God when he had everything you could possibly want. But what did he do? He thought prideful thoughts, and he allowed that to separate himself from God. Mm-hmm. So really, when C.S. Lewis brings it up, it does kind of make you think like the root first sin, in a sense, may have been pride through the eyes of Satan.
It certainly looks that way. Yeah.
So how would you, not to jump too far ahead, but if you want to, how do you think you could combat these three things? So obviously as Christians, our goal is to seek God's will, to do everything we can to run away from sin, to flee it, to develop a close relationship with Jesus. So what would you say would be the first thing that we need to do in an effort to prevent ourselves from falling prey to those three
Well, there
aspects.
is being generous.
Yep, we kind of talked
Is
about that earlier.
not being selfish, not trying to hold back, and I think one key to being generous is to deciding kind of in which world do you live. What are you headed for an eternal home, or is this your home? You know, the more you find yourself in this world, thinking this world thoughts, looking for this world outcomes, the harder it is for you to resist this world.
Right.
So taking the long view, looking toward eternity and deciding that's where my reward is a pretty good safeguard.
Sure. Yeah, the thing that you put yourself into the most is the thing that you become. It's sort of like the idea that your heart is, you probably know the passage I'm thinking of, where
your heart is, where your treasure is. Yeah, there your heart is also. Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to go to is Luke 12:15. This is the ESV. 12:15 says, "Be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And then Luke 12:21 says, "The one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God." That's the end of the passage. But the idea being there, both of those passages, if you look at the main context, is right in line with those three things. Where the eyes, the covetousness, and he's warning against that, saying, be on your guard. That's not just a passive thing. It's like, be ready. And Ephesians talks about, having the full armor of God, that idea that this is a war. This isn't just a light, casual thing. This is something you have to be mindful of and prepared for. And so we need to be thinking of ways to combat this, to be prepared for the attack that would make us have those three things, right?
Yes, yes. Count the cost.
Absolutely.
Decide what you're about. The champions of the faith in Hebrews 11, they were looking for a city with foundations. They took that long view. They're going to persevere through the challenges and the temptations of this world because they see something greater that's worth far more. What is that passage about? I'm trying. Sorry.
Well, while you're thinking of that, the Matthew 6:21 was the verse we were talking about. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And that kind of ties into what we're talking about, generosity.
Yeah.
If you're focusing on being generous and giving, and that's your way of life, that's where your heart is, you're going to develop habits, and you're going to develop a mindset and a lifestyle of that, which by default is going to mean that you're not being covetous, because that's almost the opposite of covetous. Like we were saying earlier, if you give money, you don't have as much money to want to, hold on to, and that you might be worried about losing, because you're using your resources actively in an effort to be generous. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like you're proactively fighting against that by being generous. In Matthew 6:4, the passage where he says that your Father sees your Father who sees in secret will reward you. That's another thing we were talking about. They see the greater thing that's beyond. And I think sometimes we can get dissuaded because we may not see immediate reward now. But like you said, they saw that there's a much greater reward coming later. And I think that speaks to that. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The point isn't to do things so that other people can see you and to make your deeds known to people. It's to do them in a loving way that is pleasing to God. And ultimately, I think that one of the rewards that he's talking about, and this, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just my thought, but one of the rewards is actually that you're being shaped into his image. We may not think of that as a reward, but is it not? I mean, becoming more like Christ, that's an awesome blessing. That's a reward. And I think that by being generous and actively pursuing that type of lifestyle, you're transforming. He's allowing you to partake in his nature, because that's how he is. And that allows you to be transformed into more likeness of Christ, if that makes any sense.
Which is what's the it's greater than it's the pearl of great price.
Yep.
It's and that phrase I couldn't think of a while ago was you're storing up for yourself a weight of glory. In other words, because the context where I was in Hebrews talking about the champions of faith. They were looking past this world because what the next world offers is something so much more valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're. I don't want to jump ahead of you.
That's okay.
Are you ready to go to Genesis? Okay, because we started off saying that there's an interesting symmetry to all of this in the Bible. So, and our starting point was these three sins: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. We can go to a very familiar story to most people, and that is in Genesis 3, in the story of Adam and Eve at the tree. Mm-hmm. And let me just read that, and let's see if we can't find those three sins here. Okay. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Do we have it there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, obviously she saw the fruit.
Yes.
Which is the lust of the eyes.
Yeah. Or the flesh. Yeah.
So, sorry, flesh.
Yes. Yeah.
In the covetousness to have the fruit.
Yes.
It's interesting too because, well,
it actually it was good for food. So that's flesh, and the words in my translation are a delight to the eyes. So there you got the eyes,
and that's what I was saying is the eyes as well.
And then there's the third element.
Okay, and where's that?
Which to make her wise.
Right.
And
pride.
Pride, exactly. It's to have position, to have knowledge, to be more than she is.
And why do you think the husband ate it?
That's been asked for a long time.
But just as a minor theory, pride himself, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I get it. I totally agree. Yeah, he's got to be responding in the same way as her.
Yep.
But yeah, so they're both guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how condensed that is too, in a mere 3 passages, and you have all three of them.
Yeah. So that, and this incident really creates the entire human condition before God.
Yep.
And our standing before God, which at this point is a standing of being lost.
Right.
Separated.
Right.
So we're still talking about symmetry. We could turn to now. Let me say this. Jesus is described in the scriptures as being the second Adam.
Yes.
So what would that imply?
Well, he's a type of Christ. Mm-hmm. So Adam is a type of Christ.
Right.
And obviously types aren't fully realized in every possible way, but there are aspects of Adam that are symbolic to Christ. He was the firstborn, right? He was, we just talked about this too. I'm trying to remember all these apologies. He I'm trying to think of the bride.
Both were, go ahead.
Well, and the church is the bride of Christ, and he had the first bride.
He had the first bride.
I'm on the spot.
He actually purchased his bride was purchased by being taken from his side.
Yep.
A sacrificial beginning, and Jesus had his side opened up on the cross.
Right.
So, and that was part of the price that he paid for his bride, which is the church. There are a lot of parallels. Yeah.
There's also I don't know what you would call the opposite of a parallel, but there's the non-type, I'm not sure what you would call it, but where it says that, through one man sin entered the world, and by one man all sins were forgiven. So you have that kind of opposite type, if you want to call it that. I don't know what that would be called.
Yeah.
But that, is a
counterpoint.
Counterpoint, yeah.
Yeah. So Jesus is the second Adam, but the first Adam failed. Essentially, and put us in a lost condition. And Romans 5 makes it very clear. So we must, if Jesus saves us, then Jesus must be doing something right that Adam got wrong.
Right.
So, are we ready to turn to Luke?
Sure.
Okay. Here again, keeping up with this idea of symmetry. Did you want to read that? It's Luke 1 through 10.
Oops, that's not Luke, that's John. Luke 4, 1 through 10.
Yeah.
Sure. Let me make sure I'm reading a translation here that isn't ridiculous. No, I'm like, all right, I'll read the ESV just for simplicity. All right. So, and Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days. And when they were ended, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." And Jesus said to him, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone." And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you should serve." And he took him to Jerusalem and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you. And on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Keep going.
That's fine. That's good. So we were dealing with this idea of these three sins: lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, pride of life. Can we see them here?
Absolutely. And Satan decided to use all three of them.
Yes, he really did. And we started out saying this covers the waterfront where sins are concerned.
Right.
You know, so we know Adam and Eve failed. Jesus is the second Adam. He's here to save us. He must succeed.
Absolutely.
And we see that here. And he does. So the first one, just make sure everybody's following with us here.
Sure.
The first temptation was command this stone to become bread.
He made him hungry. He
Hungry,
knew in his
flesh.
hunger that he would be tempting for food.
Right.
So he used that.
His flesh wants the food.
Yep.
And he resists that, though. He showed him, that's pretty key word there, showed. He showed him the kingdoms of the world.
Right, the eyes.
Lust of the eyes. And then finally in verse 9, and he took him to Jerusalem and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you're the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels regarding you." How's that pride?
Well, also just the fact that he'll give authority over everything to him.
Oh, yeah.
You know, here's all these kingdoms. I have these. I'll let you have authority over these.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's pride as well. But yeah.
Right. Because if you're the Son of God, it means your deity, means you're not going to be harmed. You know, throw yourself off the temple. So that's prideful.
Yeah.
Yeah. All these things. And yet he resisted all three.
Right. A perfect example.
Yeah. So where do we go? We've covered John. Anyway, excuse me here. So one way, another thought here on what Jesus was doing is he's sort of walking it back. He's sort of reversing.
He does
things.
that a lot.
He really does. He really does. So there was the idea that Adam and Eve felt shame.
Yes.
Right. So there's the idea that Adam and Eve sinned and they had to be clothed.
Right.
Right.
Cover their
Could
shame.
you comment on those two?
Which one first?
Well, let's take shame.
Okay, shame. The first thing that pops into my mind back in Genesis is that when they sinned, they immediately felt their shame. They knew that they had done something wrong, and they felt shame before God. And not to get off on another topic, but it's interesting to note that they covered themselves. What did they cover themselves with?
Yeah, animal skins.
And how did he get those?
They have to be killed.
Exactly. So something had to be sacrificed, even in Genesis, to cover their shame.
Yeah.
So that just makes me think of that.
Without the scriptures say, without blood, there's no forgiveness.
Exactly. And that ties into Christ giving his sacrifice for us. And what was the other question?
Okay, and that was that shame?
No shame, yeah.
Shame. Then shame and, oh gosh, you put me on the spot.
This is our first
shame,
podcast.
Yeah. There was shame and there was... I guess maybe we covered them both. Covering? Was that the
Covering,
other one?
yeah.
Yeah. I've lost my place.
That's okay. So basically, they covered their shame with a sacrifice of blood, which Jesus sacrificed himself, and his blood washes away our sins.
Yeah. Okay. Did the idea that how shameful the episode of the cross was?
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was the other point.
Okay.
Yeah. That, he's mocked, spit
He was
upon.
mocked, spit upon, beaten. He was basically
to somewhat degrees stripped.
Yeah, he was stripped. Yep, and he was made to be a laughingstock, if you will.
Yes.
Like, oh, he's the king of the Jews, and they basically, they tried to embarrass him.
Yeah.
They tried to make him look bad.
Yes. So we see in so many ways he has to endure and he has to successfully endure it.
Right.
He has to overcome or persevere against those temptations and come out sinless.
Right.
To be the right sacrifice for us.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And as an example for us, we may not be able to perfectly emulate Christ in everything we do, but it should be our goal to look at how he lived, how he acted, and try to emulate that. And what did he portray throughout that ordeal? Humility, right? Mm-hmm. He was incredibly humble. What I find really interesting is most of the time he never even opened his mouth.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about that, not only is it humble, but he didn't have to defend himself in most of those situations because it was obvious.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we need to be cognizant of what he did and look at the different aspects of his behavior, his attitude, and emulate that. And that doesn't mean we have to, do exactly what he did in every physical way. But one of the things that I think ties into all of this is attitude. Mm-hmm. So, Satan's attitude was one of pride and all these things that we talked about. Jesus' attitude was one of humility and subservitude, and he was the polar opposite of pride.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. For every sin, there's a virtue, they say. And I got one more point.
Okay.
If this will kind of conclude us here, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
But I think in looking at Jesus as the second Adam, and this idea of him walking things back, I think we got to look at if he did make things right, and we know he did, then what exactly did he repair that Adam did? And I think it becomes clear because if you look at the life of Adam and the life of Christ, we ought to find a parallel between the two. And I don't find it that that Jesus did not eat of the fruit. The fruit that was not placed before Jesus. Thou shalt not eat of the fruit in the tree in the center of the garden. That wasn't a test for Jesus, right? But there was something Adam didn't do that Jesus did, and that is Adam did not obey God.
Right.
And that is the critical thing. And I think if anything saves us is that Jesus, the second Adam, obeyed God right to the finish, to the very end of his life. And that reversed, if you want to say it that way, it atoned for. Repaired. Yeah. There's a lot of ways we could say it.
Sure.
What went wrong, that's how he saves us.
Sure. And one other thought, just to kind of tie it all together, we talked about the idea of generosity being the opposite of pride and being a way to effect a habitual transformation in yourself that would keep you from those three sins. Well, like Satan had the pride, Jesus had the exact opposite of that on the cross by being the most generous there ever was. So he gave his life unto death for people that didn't deserve what he was giving. That's about as generous as you can get.
No greater love has any man that he lays down his life for his friends.
So there's that generosity again. So I would just say, from my side, to wrap things up, would just be that we should focus on generosity and loving people in the same humble sort of attitude that Christ did.
Perfect. Yes. Very good.
So,
all right.
I guess that wraps it up. So thanks for being on here with me.
Thank you, Sean.
Stay tuned. We'll have more podcasts. This is just the first initial one, and we'll try to get some more as often as we can. But did you have any other words?
No, it's all good. Thanks.
Right.
All right.
See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.